The contempt in Lieutenant Morrison's voice was unmistakable as he spotted the man standing quietly beside Admiral Richardson's car. Well, look what crawled back. His fellow officers chuckled, recognizing the face that had become synonymous with failure at their base. The same man who had quit Bud S training 10 years ago, branded forever as a coward who couldn't handle the pressure. Now here he was, wearing a simple black suit, standing like he belonged in the company of admirals. Morrison's mockery echoed across the parking area as other personnel gathered to witness what promised to be an entertaining humiliation. Hey everyone, remember Jake Torres, the quitter who couldn't make it past week 3? Then the shooting started. 3 snipers, perfectly positioned, with Admiral Richardson directly in their crosshairs. What happened next defied everything they thought they knew about courage, loyalty, and the man they had written off as a failure. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoyed this story about hidden strength and redemption, consider subscribing for more tales of those who prove that appearances can be devastatingly deceiving. Jake Torres adjusted his earpiece as he scanned the crowd gathering for Admiral Richardson's public appearance at Naval Base Coronado. 10 years had passed since he'd walked away from Bud S training, and 10 years since he'd been labelled the biggest failure in his class. The whispers still followed him whenever he set foot on a military installation. Coward. Quitter. Couldn't hack it. He'd heard them all before, and he'd learned to let them slide past without reaction. His current assignment required a different kind of strength than the one measured in Hell Week endurance tests. Admiral Richardson's life depended on Jake's ability to remain invisible, to be dismissed and underestimated by everyone around him. The morning San Diego sun cast long shadows across the naval base as personnel gathered for the Admiral's address on maritime security. Jake positioned himself 30 feet from the platform, close enough to respond to threats, but far enough to avoid drawing attention to the protection detail. His suit was deliberately unremarkable, not too expensive, not too cheap, nothing that would suggest the specialized training hidden beneath his ordinary appearance. Lieutenant Morrison spotted him first, and Jake felt the familiar weight of recognition and judgment. Morrison had been a year behind Jake in the initial SEAL pipeline, one of many who had watched Jake's spectacular departure from training with a mixture of relief and superiority. Now Lieutenant Morrison wore his trident pin with pride, a symbol Jake would never possess. "Torres," Morrison called out, his voice carrying just enough volume to draw attention from nearby personnel. "What brings you back to Coronado? Nostalgia for your glory days?" Jake remained focused on his security sweep, his eyes constantly moving across the crowd, the rooftops, the access points. "Working," he said simply, his voice carrying no defensiveness, no explanation. "Working?" Morrison's laugh was deliberately loud. "What kind of work? Civilian contractor? Security guard?" His fellow officers began to gather, drawn by the familiar entertainment of Morrison's aggressive wit. "Let me guess. You're here to clean the windows on the buildings you couldn't train in." Chief Petty Officer Williams, a weathered veteran with 23 years of service, noticed the commotion and approached. Williams had been at Coronado during Jake's training cycle, had watched the young man's unexpected departure with disappointment rather than contempt. "That's enough, Morrison," Williams said quietly, but his intervention only encouraged the lieutenant. "Come on, Chief. We all remember. Week 3 of Bud S, right in the middle of Hell Week, just rang the bell and walked away." Morrison turned back to Jake, his voice taking on a cruel edge. "What was it you said to the instructors? That you couldn't continue? Real inspiring stuff." Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his position and his surveillance pattern. Chief Williams stepped closer, his voice dropping to a warning tone. "I said that's enough." "I'm just making conversation with an old friend," Morrison replied with mock innocence. "Isn't that right, Jake? We're all curious about what you've been doing since you couldn't cut it as a SEAL." The gathering crowd included several junior officers who had heard the stories, but never seen the man himself. To them, Jake Torres had become something of a cautionary tale, the recruit who had seemed promising but cracked under pressure when it mattered most. Jake finally turned to face Morrison directly, his expression calm but his eyes sharp and assessing. For just a moment, Morrison felt something shift in the air between them, a suggestion of depth and capability that didn't match the narrative he'd constructed. 10 years, Morrison continued, pushing through his momentary uncertainty. 10 years, and you're back here in a cheap suit, probably doing security work for whatever contractor would hire a Bud-S dropout. Contractor work pays well, Jake replied evenly, offering no further explanation or defense. Admiral Richardson's arrival interrupted the confrontation. The convoy of 3 black SUVs approached the platform area with military precision, and Jake immediately shifted his attention to his primary responsibility. His transformation was subtle but complete, from the object of Morrison's mockery to a professional focused entirely on threat assessment. Morrison noticed the change and smirked. "Oh, I get it. You're part of the security theatre, standing around looking important while real operators handle actual threats." As Admiral Richardson stepped from his vehicle, Jake moved to his designated position. The Admiral, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command, nodded slightly in Jake's direction, the only acknowledgement of his presence. The crowd settled as Admiral Richardson approached the podium to deliver his remarks on naval readiness and Pacific security challenges. Jake's attention remained fixed on the surrounding area, his eyes systematically scanning for anomalies, threats, or anything that didn't belong. From his position in the crowd, Morrison continued his commentary to his companions. "Look at him, playing dress-up as a bodyguard. Probably couldn't protect himself, much less an admiral." Chief Williams moved closer to Morrison, his voice taking on the authority of his rank and experience. "Lieutenant, I'm ordering you to stand down. Now." "Chief, That's an order, Morrison. Find somewhere else to be." But Morrison's damage was already done. The story of Jake Torres, the Bud-S failure now reduced to civilian security work, had rippled through the gathered personnel. Smirks and whispers followed Jake as he maintained his professional vigilance. Admiral Richardson's speech focused on the evolving security challenges in the South China Sea and the Navy's commitment to maintaining freedom of navigation. His words carried the weight of experience and authority, but Jake's attention remained divided between the Admiral's safety and the subtle signs of threat assessment that had become second nature. 3 minutes into the speech, Jake noticed the first anomaly. A maintenance worker on a rooftop 200 yards away had been in the same position for too long, his supposed work forgotten as he focused on something else. Jake's training kicked in automatically, his mind calculating angles, distances, and threat possibilities. He spoke quietly into his sleeve microphone, a communication device so discreet that Morrison and his companions assumed Jake was simply adjusting his cufflinks. "Control, Raven 1. I have eyes on possible overwatch position, Building 7, northwest corner." The response came through his nearly invisible earpiece. "Copy, Raven 1. Investigating." Morrison, still within earshot, caught fragments of Jake's communication and snorted with amusement. "Listen to this guy, Raven 1, probably talking to base security about a suspicious pigeon." But Jake had already identified the second anomaly. A delivery truck had been parked in the same position for 15 minutes, its driver nowhere to be seen. The vehicle's position offered a clear line of sight to the platform, while remaining partially concealed behind a maintenance shed. "Control, Raven 1. Secondary concern, delivery vehicle, Grid Charlie 4. Driver absent, engine running." Chief Williams, despite his earlier dismissal of Morrison's behaviour, found himself watching Jake's professional demeanour with growing interest. The man's movements were economical and purposeful, his attention focused with an intensity that seemed inconsistent with mere civilian security work. The third anomaly confirmed Jake's worst fears. A figure in maintenance clothing had appeared on a different rooftop, carrying what appeared to be equipment, but moving with the deliberate purpose of someone establishing a position rather than performing work. "Control, Raven 1. 3-point setup confirmed. Recommend immediate evac." Morrison's mockery continued, though his voice carried less conviction now. "Guy's really committed to his roleplay. Probably sees threats in every shadow." Jake's hand moved to his jacket, not to the obvious location where a typical security guard might carry a sidearm, but to a position that suggested equipment and training far beyond civilian standards. His movements were smooth and practiced, the actions of someone whose muscle memory had been forged through extensive specialized training. Admiral Richardson, still delivering his remarks, showed no awareness of the developing situation. The crowd remained focused on his words, unaware of the threat assessment unfolding around them. "Control, this is Raven 1. I'm going to need immediate backup and medical standby. We have a coordinated threat development." The response in his earpiece was immediate and professional. "Raven 1, backup is 30 seconds out. Nest team is moving to your position." Morrison finally began to sense that something was genuinely wrong. Jake's demeanor had shifted from professional alertness to a level of focused intensity that suggested real danger rather than security theater. "What's he doing?" one of Morrison's companions whispered. Before Morrison could answer, the first shot rang out. The crack of the sniper rifle cut through Admiral Richardson's speech like a blade. The bullet struck the podium inches from where the Admiral stood, sending splinters of wood flying and immediately transforming the orderly gathering into chaos. Jake's response was instantaneous and devastating in its precision. While everyone else was still processing the sound of gunfire, he was already moving. His first action was to tackle Admiral Richardson, driving him to the ground behind the reinforced section of the platform in a movement that suggested extensive training in executive protection. "Stay down," Jake commanded, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "Do not move until I give you the all-clear." The crowd scattered in panic, but Morrison and several other officers found themselves frozen in shock and confusion. They had expected civilian security protocols, calls for backup, defensive positioning, maybe some basic crowd control. What they witnessed instead defied everything they thought they knew about Jake Torres. Jake's hand emerged from his jacket holding not a standard security sidearm, but a customized HK-45 with modifications that spoke to specialized operational requirements. His movement from the platform was not the retreat of a civilian contractor seeking cover, but the aggressive advance of someone trained to neutralize threats rather than simply respond to them. "Control. Raven 1 is mobile. 3 shooters, coordinated attack pattern. I'm going to need that backup now." The second shot came from the maintenance truck, confirming Jake's earlier assessment. But instead of seeking cover like every civilian security protocol would dictate, Jake advanced directly toward the threat, using terrain and obstacles with the fluid expertise of someone who had done this before. Morrison watched in stunned disbelief as Jake moved with speed and precision that belonged to a different category of training entirely. What the hell? Chief Williams pressed against a concrete barrier, grabbed Morrison's arm. "That's not civilian security, son. That's military." Jake reached the delivery truck's position in less than 20 seconds, approaching from an angle that the shooter hadn't anticipated. His breach of the vehicle was textbook special operations, fast, violent, and decisive. The sound of the brief struggle carried across the base, followed by silence. "Control, Raven 1. Shooter 2 neutralized. Moving to position 3. The third sniper, positioned on the northeast rooftop, had the best vantage point but also the most exposed position. Jake's approach required crossing 40 yards of open ground while remaining exposed to accurate rifle fire. It was the kind of tactical problem that would challenge even experienced operators. Instead of the indirect approach that civilian training would suggest, Jake chose direct confrontation. He sprinted across the open space in a pattern that maximized his speed while minimizing the sniper's ability to lead his target. Morrison and the other observers watched this display of tactical expertise with growing amazement. "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispered. "He's actually—" The sniper's shots followed Jake's movement but couldn't compensate for his erratic pattern and incredible speed. Jake reached the building's base and disappeared from view, leaving the watching officers to imagine what was happening on the rooftop above. 3 minutes later, Jake's voice came through the communication system with professional calm. "Control, Raven 1. All threats neutralized. Area secure. Request immediate tactical team for cleanup and investigation." Admiral Richardson, still prone behind the platform, looked up at the man who had just saved his life. "Torres, you can get up now." Jake returned to the platform. his demeanour shifting back to professional calm as if the past 5 minutes had been a routine security check rather than a coordinated assassination attempt. He helped Admiral Richardson to his feet, quickly checking for injuries with the efficiency of someone trained in combat medicine. "Are you hurt, sir?" "No, thanks to you." Admiral Richardson studied Jake's face with new recognition. "I think we need to have a conversation." The aftermath of the attack transformed the entire dynamic on the base. Emergency vehicles arrived, followed by investigative teams and military personnel who treated Jake with the deference reserved for someone whose capabilities commanded respect rather than curiosity. Morrison and his companions found themselves relegated to witness status as Jake coordinated with arriving tactical teams, his communication and expertise making it clear that his role extended far beyond civilian security contractor. Commander Sarah Chen, the base intelligence officer, approached Jake with a sealed envelope. "Raven 1, priority communication from DevGru Command." Morrison's face went pale. DevGru, the Navy's development group, commonly known as SEAL Team 6, didn't communicate with civilian contractors or failed Bud-S candidates. They communicated with their own. Jake accepted the envelope and read its contents quickly before nodding to Commander Chen. "Tell them mission status is complete. Asset is secure." "Asset?" Morrison finally found his voice. "What asset? Who are you?" Admiral Richardson stepped forward, his expression mixing gratitude with something that looked like amusement. "Gentlemen, I believe introductions are in order. This is Petty Officer First Class Jake Torres, Naval Special Warfare Development Group." The silence that followed was complete. Morrison's mouth opened and closed without sound, his brain struggling to process information that contradicted everything he thought he knew. "But he quit Bud-S," Morrison finally managed. "We all saw him ring the bell." "No," Admiral Richardson corrected. "You all saw him follow orders. Jake's departure from Bud-S was part of a specialized recruitment program. Certain individuals are selected for training that goes beyond the standard SEAL pipeline." Chief Williams stepped forward, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding. "Black program recruitment." Admiral Richardson nodded. "Jake spent the last 10 years in training and operations that make standard SEAL training look like basic preparation. What you witnessed today was just a small demonstration of those capabilities." Jake remained quiet, his attention focused on the continuing security sweep rather than the explanations being provided to his former tormentors. His earpiece crackled with updates from the investigation teams. "Raven 1, initial assessment indicates sophisticated planning and equipment. This was a professional operation." "Copy," Jake responded quietly. "Recommend enhanced security protocols for all flag officers in this region." Morrison stared at Jake, his earlier contempt replaced by a mixture of awe and embarrassment. 10 years. You've been doing this for 10 years? Jake finally looked directly at Morrison. Among other things, Commander Chen approached again with another communication. "Raven 1, DevGru Command requests immediate debrief. Transport is en route." The sound of helicopter rotors became audible in the distance, growing louder as the aircraft approached the base. It wasn't a standard military transport, but a specialized aircraft that spoke to the level of operations Jake was involved with. "Gentlemen," Admiral Richardson said, "I believe this concludes today's demonstration of why we don't judge people by appearances or incomplete information." As the helicopter landed, 3 figures emerged wearing the kind of gear and bearing that left no doubt about their affiliation. They approached Jake with the professional courtesy of equals, recognizing expertise. "Raven 1, the team leader addressed Jake. "Outstanding work. Command wants to debrief and discuss next assignment." Jake nodded, then turned to Admiral Richardson. "Sir, recommend you consider enhanced protection protocols. This was too well coordinated to be an isolated incident." "Agreed. Thank you, Petty Officer Torres." As Jake prepared to leave with the DevGru team, Morrison found his voice one final time. "Jake, we all." Jake paused, studying Morrison's face with something that might have been sympathy. "Lieutenant, you saw what you were supposed to see. Everyone did. That was the point." Chief Williams approached Jake before he could reach the helicopter. "Son, I was there 10 years ago when you rang that bell. I saw the look in your eyes. That wasn't acting." Jake considered the chief's observation carefully. No, Chief, it wasn't. The hardest part of deep cover recruitment isn't the physical training or the operational skills. It's convincing yourself that the person you're pretending to be is real enough to fool everyone, including yourself sometimes. You actually believed you were quitting? For about 6 months, yeah. That's what made it convincing. The psychological preparation for this kind of work requires complete commitment to the cover identity, even from yourself. Admiral Richardson joined the conversation. The program Jake was recruited for requires operators who can maintain deep cover for extended periods. They have to be able to genuinely believe their cover story while retaining access to their operational capabilities when needed. Morrison, still struggling with the revelation, stepped closer. So when you rang the bell... I was following a script I didn't know I was following, Jake explained. The selection process identifies individuals with specific psychological profiles, people who can compartmentalize their identity completely while maintaining their core capabilities under stress. The DevGru team leader checked his watch. Raven 1, we need to move. Jake nodded, then looked back at the assembled officers. The mission isn't over, gentlemen. This was just one operation. The person you knew as the Bud S failure goes back to being that person until he's needed again. But everyone will know now, Morrison protested. Admiral Richardson smiled. Will they? How many people do you think will believe that Jake Torres, the man who quit SEAL training, is actually a member of DevGru? Especially when official records will show him returning to his civilian contractor position next week. The implications settled over the group like a revelation. Jake's most effective cover wasn't a false identity. It was the truth about his past failure, reimagined and repurposed as camouflage for capabilities that exceeded everyone's expectations. The best place to hide an operator, Admiral Richardson continued, is in plain sight, with a reputation that makes people underestimate him. Jake shook hands with Admiral Richardson one final time. Sir, it's been an honor protecting you. The honor has been mine, Petty Officer Torres. As Jake walked toward the helicopter, Morrison called out one last time. Jake, what do we call you now? Jake paused at the aircraft's door, looking back with something that might have been humor. Around here? I'm still just the guy who quit Bud S. 3 weeks later, Jake Torres returned to Naval Base Coronado as a civilian contractor, wearing the same unremarkable suits and maintaining the same quiet demeanor that had characterized his previous assignment. To most personnel, he was simply the security contractor who had been present during the incident with Admiral Richardson, a footnote in a larger story about military readiness and security protocols. Morrison, now bearing the knowledge of Jake's true identity, found himself in the unique position of watching a master class in operational camouflage. Jake moved through the base with the same unassuming presence as before, drawing no attention and generating no curiosity. It's incredible, Morrison confided to Chief Williams during a quiet moment. He's like a ghost hiding in plain sight. That's the point, son, Williams replied. The most dangerous operators are the ones nobody sees coming. Jake's assignment at Coronado would continue for 6 more months, during which he would maintain his cover while conducting security assessments and threat evaluations that contributed to the protection of multiple high-value assets. His reputation as the Bud Des failure who had lucked into civilian security work provided perfect camouflage for operations that would never appear in any official record. The 3 snipers who had attempted to assassinate Admiral Richardson were identified as members of a foreign intelligence service, their operation part of a larger campaign targeting American military leadership. The investigation revealed connections to similar attempts on other bases, all sharing the sophisticated planning and equipment that characterized state-sponsored operations. Jake's after-action report, classified at levels that ensured it would never see public review, detailed the intelligence gathered during his infiltration of the enemy network. His role as an underestimated civilian contractor had provided access to conversations and observations that traditional intelligence gathering would have missed. 6 months after the assassination attempt, Jake received new orders that would take him to a different assignment, a different base, and a different cover identity. Before departing Coronado, he encountered Morrison one final time in the base commissary. Heading out? Morrison asked, recognizing the subtle signs of transition that marked the end of an assignment. Yeah, new job opportunity. Morrison nodded, understanding that the job opportunity likely involved operations he would never hear about. Jake, I wanted to apologize for... No need, Lieutenant. You played your part perfectly. The mockery, the dismissal, the story about the Bud-S failure, it all contributed to the mission's success. Morrison considered this. Was any of it real? The quitting? The failure? Jake's expression became thoughtful. The fear was real. The doubt was real. The pain of walking away from something I thought I wanted was real. The only difference was that walking away led somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't have imagined when I rang that bell. They shook hands, and Morrison watched as Jake Torres, the man who had redefined his understanding of strength and courage, walked away for the final time. Within an hour, Jake would be processed for departure, his security credentials revoked, his access terminated, and his presence erased from the base's daily routine. But somewhere else, at another base or facility, a new cover identity would be established. Another reputation would be built. Another underestimated individual would take position among the personnel, watching and waiting for the moment when hidden capabilities would be needed. The program that had created Jake Torres was ongoing, its operators scattered across military installations and government facilities worldwide, each one carrying the burden of maintaining a cover that required them to be dismissed, underestimated, and forgotten by those around them. In the end, Jake's greatest achievement wasn't the operational skills that had saved Admiral Richardson's life. It was his ability to be overlooked by people who thought they understood what strength and courage looked like. In a world where reputation and recognition often mattered more than substance, Jake had mastered the art of being invisible while remaining ready to stand between danger and the people he had sworn to protect. The man who had failed Bud-S training had become something more than a SEAL. He had become a guardian whose very existence was his mission's greatest secret.